his input at once there's a meeting of the minds, so to speak, with the stakeholders with regards to the appraisal format, then that might suffice. As well, and all of that will be predicated on the fact that you have a sound strategic plan, right? So and the assumption is that the plan will incorporate the various policy directives from those in authority. And the plan should also provide us with not only with the various strategies and perhaps even sub-plans, such as an implementation plan, a public education plan, a public information plan, and whatever other resource plans and so on. So if the Commission is provided with that document, and DPA suggesting that the document must come from the Commissioner of Police or from the MNS, the strat plan.
Police, Commissioner. Dr. I know the DPA has to be an integral part, and I guess once we go forward to the second year, I want to make myself available to be part of the design of the instrument to be so used. I want to say that I really would like to be part of it in terms of maybe whatever I can share. Okay.
Let me just share a few thoughts on this particular matter. The way the Constitution is structured, the role of the Police Service Commission is to act as some sort of insulating body between the politician and the police commissioner. That is inherent in our system. And that is why the Police Service Commission is, in a sense, reportable to the President and Parliament. Now, however, in terms of target setting, the requirements for the police service, it is the executive that determines policy and moves to the Parliament to implement legislation to give effect to policy. So there must be a clear understanding of the role of the Police Service Commission in generating efficiency. The Police Service Commission is not about setting policy.
True.
Let us be very clear on that. The Police Service Commission is about oversight and administration to deal, let's say, with measuring the effectiveness. And I say the word measuring the effectiveness of policy. What you don't want is the politicization of the police service. And that is the only reason in other jurisdictions you have that politicization where it is the executive that essentially appoints the police commission. That is not the case here. The intent, as I understand it, is that Parliament, or at least one arm of the Parliament, the lower house, goes through the process of determining who the police commission is. Let me just finish this thought before. And so if we get it very clear, what is the role of the Police Service Commission? I hear the question come up about, we don't know what the National Security Council does. So therefore, how could we measure? But much of the measurement is already embedded and set out by the Ministry of National Security. My understanding is the National Security Council will deal with matters that they ought not to have brought to the national community for security reasons. So if we start to refine and streamline the role of the Police Service Commission and what it will get involved in, then you start to make sense and you start to minimize the fragmentation. The question of the role of the director, the DPA, is something that remains contentious in the sense that one party will say, well, we are not getting sufficient service in a timely manner from the DPA. And the DPA would say, well, I have to work through the CPO, I have to work through the Ministry of Public Administration, I have to be in conformance with all the laws as the accounting officer. So those arguments have been there since God was a boy. And what we really want to do is change that kind of speak, the jargon, so that we get closer to efficiency. Now, to do that, it might be, and the only way that it could be changed is that the legislation regulation allows for a greater sense of autonomy in terms of selection, recruiting, and so on for the secretariat. Until that point in time, that is where you are. So your work and focus, as far as that is concerned, must be by getting regulations to the parliament that seeks to change that. Unless that is the case, we will be talking and talking and talking. Tell me where you move the regulations to, whether it is on the parliamentary agenda, if that is the case, or if the Police Service Commission can make its own regulations, some of which may have to go to the parliament, some of which may be subject to negative resolution. In some cases, you can make your own regulation. That is where the work has to be done in order to move this thing forward. Sorry, MP. You wanted to...
Yes. Ms. McDonald.
Mr. Chairman, through you. Question to Mr. Ram Kilawan. Very simple question. You said a short while ago that the police service is not about setting policy. The Police Service Commission, is that it? Not about setting the policy. So I would like to ask, who sets the policy for the Police Service Commission? I just want to know.
In our system, it is the executive that sets the policy for the deliverables in the police service. That is always the case. But where the Chinese walls are, and I wouldn't say Chinese walls, thicker walls than that. Where the walls are is that what you don't want is the politicization of the police service. And therefore, the whole question of oversight of appointments and meeting targets and so on, you have a separate independent body that does that and is really, in theory, reportable to Parliament and the head of state. And so policy has always been and ought always to be with the executive. And it is the executive that comes to Parliament if there is need to say, let us put in legislation X, Y, and Z so that we could give effect to these policies. And that is where we as a Parliament sit and debate. The selection of the Police Service Commission is not for the entire Parliament, according to the laws of our land. The selection of the Police Service Commissioner is in the lower house. The Senate does not get involved in that. So I hope that answers your question.
Sure, thanks.
Any other views on this issue? Yes, Mr. Reno.
Yeah, just one point, and I really didn't want to reach this point so quickly, but since the issue was raised, clearly the questions as outlined by the DPA, we have staffing issues, accommodation issues, contracting issues, purchasing issues, and all these impact negatively on the operations of the Commission. And as alluded to by Senator Ram Kilawan, I would just want to suggest that a possible apparatus may be a Service Commission's Management Authority. And I'm saying that just so that we could subvert some of those challenges which we face. So this authority would have some independence to be able to hire, to provide accommodation, to contract services, to purchase, and so on, for its own needs. Just a suggestion.
I think that may be interested for it, but the idea thrown out, so there may be views for and against. All right, I guess someone wants to comment on that. But I want to come back to the constitutional remit of the Commission again. We have ventilated some issues on the monitoring appraisal aspect. The other aspect that is a little bothersome for us is the difference between the structure that calls for the setting up of an appellate body and the current provision in the Constitution for the Commission to hear appeals. What we are seeing actually now is an increase in the volume of appeals against decisions of the Commissioner of Police. And that volume may very well represent, well, it's significant. I think that's gone to somewhere around 37 or 22 new appeals and so on. So it may represent a significant amount of work for the current commission, in that the commission has set up its tribunal, an appeals tribunal from amongst its members. And that's one point. The question is there a need for revision of the legislation to formalize the setting up of this appellate body? Because under the approved structure, you have, I think, a retired judge, about approximately 10 positions.
Well, let me share another thought on this from the perspective of the Joint Select Committee. We have raised and put it on record that the commission itself has never been properly structured to deal with some of these matters of appeal. Never been structured to do that. Sometimes, and it might be rather fortuitous that we have someone of the caliber of Mr. Khan, who has been a former industrial court member, who can address some of these issues. But there is no requirement in the Constitution that the commission be so organized with persons of that particular skill. Now, let me go back a little bit. I believe that the legislation is flawed in that it gives the Commissioner of Police to appoint the entire middle management of the police service. Now, when that happens, then the next step is that you get a whole significant range of appeals then coming to the Police Service Commission. I know of no, certainly in the private sector, where the CEO can appoint such a large body of the management, apart from the two, let's say, deputy CEOs. Most of those decisions ought to, and I think in this legislation, in terms of changes, those decisions with regard to the senior management of the service should be a recommendation of the police commissioner and get sign-off and agreement by the Police Service Commission. That would do away, or ought to do away, or facilitate the whole process of appeal. Because if the commission receives, let's say, assistant superintendents and senior superintendents and so on, and I don't want to go back to the old system where every single police officer has to be appointed by the Police Service Commission, but I'm talking about the senior management in the police. If you have a structure where the police commissioner says this ACP and so on, okay, we hear your recommendations and we approve. If those appeals then come to the Police Service Commission, that has already been done in collaboration with, an agreement with the recommendations of the police commissioner. Now we have created a system where everybody below deputy commissioner can go the route of an appeal. And when you do that, the Police Service Commission, I would venture to say, is not properly structured to deal with those appeals. I have made a suggestion, which is that we ought to look now, since the public service is probably the largest employer. When I say public service, I mean public service, teaching service, police service, is the largest employer. Maybe there is the need now for us to have a Public Service Commission appeals court that is separate and apart. Because you have an industrial court that deals with more and more the private sector. The private sector, it doesn't, in my view, employ as many people, as the public service. I may be wrong, but you have 130,000 people. And in most cases, the appeals process is long drawn out. It is very inefficient. People die before they get a determination. They retire before they get a determination. And there is need for that in order to give efficiency to the service. So to summarize, 2 points. One, in specifically to the Police Service Commission and the surrounding legislation, that there is need when we look back at this legislation as to who ought to be appointed upon recommendation of the Police Commissioner to the Public Service Commission, that independent body that is ring-fenced. And secondly, there is need for structural reform which speaks to whether or not we should have a public sector adjudication court of some kind.
Yes, Chairman.
All right. Thank you. Could I respond in three, by raising 3 points? It is a useful intervention. Let us take my question of appeals and time required to deal with them. And an adjustment process now exists. Let us look at the evidence, Mr. Ramkalawan. The evidence suggests that the appeals mainly deal with constables up to inspector. There are very, very few appeals higher up than that, relatively speaking. So it means if you transfer the responsibilities to the Police Service Commission for that upper management, it wouldn't really solve the backlog that we have in about. But there is still value in what you're saying in terms of the Police Service Commission having something to do with the appointments at the senior management level.